Hello and welcome back to the Wizard's Chest. Once again with me is Gisela Hoffman, Hanna Kroger's daughter, and Dave Smith. And in this segment, I want to talk strictly about the kids and helping them with a lot of the challenges we're seeing across the board through all aspects of society. By that I'm talking about the brain integration that you guys work with, the autism and Asperger's, which has gone epidemic through the society. We also want to talk about ADD and some of those aspects that you guys work with, and all kinds of different things about the energetic healing and the use of scalar technology to broadcast the different vibratory remedies or homeopathic remedies to someone. And just in my instance, just to give you an idea of the audience, I tested on the machine, as well as I have two of my grandkids on the Access Hanna. We got the book over here. This is the little bit of the novel. It's Help One Another, and this is an anthology of the teachings of Hanna Kroger and all of her remedies. And this is what a lot of the protocols in the program are based on, as well as anything additional information that gets downloaded as you guys are through it, correct? Well, in my particular instance, I have had a situation that I did get checked out this last fall where my blood chemistry, the amount of white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets was out of balance. Basically, one of the gene expressions had gone a little bit off, and it's called a JAK2 gene mutation. The hematologist had no fix for it other than to give me a prescription med for sickle cell anemia, which I chose not to take. They wanted to do additional testing, such as a biopsy in the marrow itself, and I refused that as well. But I used it as a diagnostic because the hospital and his office has the capability of doing a much better blood count for me that I could check, but I wanted to do my own therapies myself, and I'm doing 5 different protocols. Yours is one of them. So last time I visited here about a little over a month ago, Gisela ran me through the program, and so I've been on the protocol for about a month, and my wife has the capability of looking at the blood with a dark field microscope, and my blood, not in the first couple of weeks, but after literally just this last week, we saw a huge shift in my blood where I bet you it was as much as 80% healed. And granted, it's not the only protocol I'm doing different meditations, much like what you were referencing with your own material with the lead, but I'm doing different meditations and healing work within. But I feel very strongly that the protocols we were running had a huge effect, and I look forward after we're done here today to do a little upgrade and update to see where it's showing in the computer program. Within that, I've seen my own shift within that for my stuff. But I want to talk about the kids. And let's talk about really all 3 of the major scenarios that we're seeing with the kids. And I want to talk more about the electronics that we were talking about over lunch as well. So let's talk about ADD. That's a biggie pretty much across the board that the society labels. We know with the shifts in consciousness, these kids that are coming in are tuned for a different world than I was when I was born, when I grew up in the 50s. And yet, because they're accessing so much information and they're more sensitive, so they're picking up energy from everybody around them, one of the ways they dissipate energy is through movement. But there's another aspect to that, and that's focus within the brain. what have you guys seen and some of the examples that you guys have been able to do with the kids you've worked with Access Hanna, and talk about some of your favorite stories.
Well, I want to start by just considering what you said about growing up in the 50s. The environment of the 50s was very different than today's environment.
You think?
Yeah. And I always tell my kids, when I was your age,
Back in the day,
we had one TV channel. But there's a lot of truth in that. I think that today's children that are exhibiting a lot of neurological confusion. We'll just start with that word to begin with. It's the brain as it develops. When you're a toddler, when you're a baby to a toddler and growing through, you're supposed to be experiencing situations that enhance your neurological efficiency. And that's not happening anymore nowadays, because I see in the grocery stores and I see in the airports and I see in people, so many parents, so many families allow their kids to have the TV as the babysitter, or they hand them the tablet to keep them quiet in the grocery store. And make no mistake about it, that is very unnatural. When you compare that to the history of mankind in general, we didn't have this for thousands, if not millions of years. We didn't have that kind of stimulation. And what happens there is with these screens and this, it's a band of information, a data stream, if you will, that's coming into my brain through my eyes and my ears. If I'm watching TV, it's through the eyes and the ears. Well, as it comes in and comes in and comes in, there's a lot of information that a brain is supposed to deal with. It is supposed to look at it and say, is this important? Is this not important? What am I going to do with this information? Can I react to it? Can I express it back out? But in today's world, where we have so much of neurological disorders with our kids, it's because one of the reasons certainly is that one of the big differences is the amount of screen time, the amount of this passive taking in rather than an exploratory based upon a self choice to go out and experience the world. Now we just sit on our couch and we get this constant stream coming in. Well, what that does neurologically is it makes your brain very adept at what I would call short attention span theater. Because if you watch a TV show, you watch a TV commercial for 30 seconds, there's going to be at least a dozen different camera shots in that 30 seconds, angles. And it's a different perspective. And so your brain is going to have to try to compensate or accept it. It's the same with the sound. On a 30-second commercial, there's 3 or 4 soundtracks. And so our brain is becoming hardwired at that developmental age to not be able to pay attention for more than a couple of seconds. Because the stream keeps shifting. It's like a car without a clutch.
My yoga teacher, along those lines, said that even as little as 5 years ago, our timing for how long we could take a focus was 12 seconds. It's now down to 8.
Oh, yeah.
And a goldfish can focus for 9.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you got to get a gold. I'm probably at a silverfish right now.
I'm not sure how much, but moving up. But it's along the same lines. Yeah, they're testing it.
The reason why, though, is because as I'm watching TV as a child and it's streaming in, the brain, the human body develops itself according to need, immediate needs. And the immediate need is to try to take in all of this visual and all of this auditory. And so the channel, the bandwidth keeps expanding naturally because it's a response mechanism within the human body to say, I need more of this skill. In this case, the skill is this stream of data. But because kids are watching so much of this hourly, on a daily basis, when is the time for them to ponder it? Where is their time to process it, to digest it, to express it back out.
As you said, to express it off camera. They don't have that. And yet you taught at Waldorf, and you were describing how you and the other teachers could watch a child out there on the playground and tell by how they were acting if they were watching cartoons or not, or many different things.
How much that individual is exposed to artificial life, because that's what it comes down to. Is when you live on the couch and all you do is watch TV, you really do think that reality is 50 people jumping out of an airplane and fighting amongst each other on a desert island to earn $1 million, while there's a crew of 400 with cameras watching you do this. That's reality. That's reality for people that sit on the couch. Now, for me, reality is, wow, I work at McDonald's and I flip hamburgers all day long. For me, reality is walking down the street and hearing the dog bark. But for little children, when you're 1 year old and you already have the tablet in front of you, your reality is this two-dimensional projection. And it becomes this massive conduit, this broadband of this incoming stream that you never have a chance to push back out. So these kids will grow up with short attention spans, and they're constantly looking for a new fix, because that new fix was trained into their brain in those commercials and those TV shows with multiple camera angles going off at once, with multiple soundtracks. And they never have a chance to process that, because it's just constant. You're just constantly getting hit by a fire hydrant. They can't. Public school, any kid that grows up in that environment, they are the ones that you when as a teacher, I taught middle school for 15 years. As a teacher, you recognize that they can't express themselves verbally, socially interact in a healthy manner, because they don't have the wiring. It's too small. It wasn't used enough. It's like you use your muscles or you lose them. Or if you use your one muscle, then it becomes this big monstrous thing.
And it's out of balance.
Yeah, and it's out of balance. So this is how the challenge that kids are growing up with. So when people want to talk about, the crystal kids, the indigo kids, the kids of this generation, that generation, to me, the real question is the wiring of our brain in the developmental age, is it healthy?
And in today's society.
Right. Because, to put it into an organic form, it's not organic. It's not natural for cavemen to sit on a couch and watch a picture of something else happening. That's not natural. And we can't cope with that yet. And for those of us that didn't grow up with cell phones in our hand from the age of birth, it's very difficult for us to recognize the real danger. But as we see more and more of this coming, now it's been how many years? It's almost 20, 25 years of this level of things. And before that, it was just when cable TV came out, how it dumbed down America. And there is
all of a sudden you had 150 channels or 100 channels initially instead of 3.
Right.
And no remote control.
No.
And I had to get up and change the channel.
Yeah, you were the remote control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Back in the day.
But with 150 channels, what's stunning to me is when I sit down and I see those channels flip by, it's like there's nothing worthwhile watching.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had experiments where they've done with kids, 3-year-olds, and they've taken a Sesame Street episode, and they superimpose on it a different soundtrack from Sesame Street, not the one that goes with what's going on. They put a different one on, and then they asked the kids questions, and nobody was confused. Nobody questioned the idea, like, well, what he was saying wasn't what he was saying.
So nothing was synced. It was just
nothing was synced, and they had no clue. And that's that passive victimization that we're getting is from technology of today.
Yeah. So going back to that, what do you guys do with your program to help with that?
Well, it's interesting. Some of the original ideas and the original focus was on how can we in this case, strengthen the capacity of the processors to process more data in an outward fashion. How do we tweak that neurological muscle to get the expression to come out? And we can do that, and originally through kinesiology could be done through acupressure points and accessing neurological circuits. But we've taken it into Access Hanna, and now we can broadcast those very same circuits that way, is we can put it in. But the funny thing is, in brain development, you can certainly address this idea that, for example, our child, the example child of watching TV too much, we can tweak and we can trigger growth in the nerve to synapse to get it to go in the direction we want, which is more of an outward expression. But that's only half the puzzle, because the other half of the puzzle is the education of the parents. Because when parents, come to us, or as a teacher when they came to me and they said, my son is not at grade level, and you start to ask questions about screen time, you start asking about diet, you start asking about quality time with the parents, and all of that is missing. That there's a whole combination of things. So what we found with Access Hanna that's really very beneficial is when we want to do a brain integration protocol on a child, I'm pretty much steadfastly saying I'm not going to do that unless I can do it to you simultaneously. Because in the family unit, there's a synergy that develops between the individuals. So, Gisela has her energy field here, you have yours here, and I have mine here. And somewhere in the middle, there's this synergistic conglomerate of energy that becomes the family, that becomes the home. And so when you have a child who is you're being told as a parent that it's ADD or it's this, or
It's
this.
got some different problems, challenges,
Yeah.
however you want to label them.
Then we have to say, okay, is it, if I fix the kid's nerve, his one synapse, are things better? Well, no. Not if the TV stays on, not if the food is still poor, if he's still eating Cheetos, is still having red dye number 2. And so many parents, we all have our own kind of baggage that comes with us. So I often observe that the parents are, for whatever reason, unable to help themselves before they can help their kids. And, this is part of that societal expectation that is now the short appreciation, immediate gratitude, that I want a pill to fix this. And there's so much more to healing than just pushing the button on the computer. There's so much more to healing. Certainly with a client, with a parent, to say, okay, you got to cut out the red dye number 2. Well, that's the magic button, but it's impossible, nearly impossible, unless the parents are cooperating.
And this is where the jumping down the rabbit hole and seeing where the investigation goes, that an intuitive healer works in conjunction with the technology. And this is what's missing, I think, hugely in allopathic medicine. It's one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And the computer spits out and says, this is standard practice. And you as a doctor have a certain level of leeway in whatever's going on. But once again, if you step too far out of that, it's not going to work. But as a holistic, integrative healer, especially energetically, we're not limited to boundaries, because the entire quantum field is our domain. And that's where you developed your own vibratory healing things for your lead. But I also wanted to come back to Gisela and talk about just some of the stories, because obviously focus is one, but the brain integration helps literally with the physical brain coordination, all of that. Dyslexia, my daughter has dyslexia, so we talked at length off camera, and of course we can't go through every one of these, but we may eventually. And then we have autism, and autism is such a hot topic society-wide. Tell me about some of the stories, the success stories that you guys have had and seen within the brain integration. And now, what was the other term that you guys called it?
Neuroreactivation?
Neuroreactivation.
Yes.
It's too many. It's too big.
Well, the Access Hanna software allows us to handle a problem, an issue from all sides. From the physical side, from the acupressure side. So one of the first things that happens when we have a child is we first have to take care of the physical side. In other words, what is going on? Part of what happens is there is so much heavy metal chemical stuff that are so inadvertent that is often causing a brain fog or a nerve dysfunction. The other day I had a 13-year-old girl who was having real memory issues, and she was also having her menstrual cycle was getting off. It was painful, and she just wasn't reacting properly, couldn't focus anymore. So I asked the parents what had happened, and they were very, very good parents in the sense that they gave the child good food. They didn't allow too much TV time. And what the software showed me was a heavy metal, which was asbestos. And I said, well, where did the child get that asbestos? No, well, they live in an old house, but they had moved into it about 10 years before. The house had been redone already, and so they lived upstairs, but they redid the basement for the girl when she became a teenager so that she would have her own private little domain. And I said, was the little baby involved in that? No, but there was asbestos down there. And evidently, as it was disturbed, it went through the floor into the air. And that little girl was full of asbestos. Asbestos is something that we usually don't think of as causing, neurological issues. But that and mercury and arsenic and aluminum are the primary causes of or if there is a physical cause, those are the primary heavy metals under it.
Started her puberty, that's when she really had major knockdown, drag out fights with her mother.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
Remember, she basically left home at the age of 15.
Wow. Yeah, right.
You know,
Yeah. To come to your house.
to get out of crazy land.
Yes. Oh,
I'm just curious about that.
yeah. What is that?
But with asbestos, my thought was immediately along those lines, like what was going on in the house that would be characterized by that kind of clue.
Right.
Because asbestos is about breathing.
Right. Breathing.
The constriction of breathing in this reality.
Mm-hmm. Getting a clean breath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we were together about the child that was autistic, or the child that had reading difficulties, and almost overnight began reading. He was 10 years old, I believe,
Yes.
10-year-old little boy. And then you had the woman in North Carolina that was the autistic woman, if that's correct?
Yes.
Or was she a young lady, or
No.
how?
Yeah.
But tell me about those two.
Well, why don't you tell them about Isaac?
The 10-year-old.
The 10-year-old, yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Was he the hockey player as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
So he did both the reading and got motor skill.
Well, sure. When you rewire the brain, restart the brain, the question is what is being enhanced, and it can be a variety of things that immediately occurs. In that boy's case, he was hating school, and the reason why was pretty obvious because he was having difficulty reading, so he was being pulled out of the class with his friends to go to a special reading group. And of course, special ed reading primarily is if you keep reading this over and over enough, you'll get better. Now that's kind of, to me, that's kind of like saying there's a person in a wheelchair trying to get across the street and he's not able to push himself fast enough before the traffic changes. Well, if you keep working at that, you'll get better. And so it's very disheartening for a child. So of course they hate school. And then when they hate school, that becomes apparent, and then the parents are informed because there's behavioral issues, and that's exactly what happened. It all cascades into this very bright, happy kid hates school, and he won't read, and he feels miserable, he has no self-esteem, and it starts with the dyslexia. And just to flip that switch, which is a left-right switch, and flip that so that gives him his brain a chance to start to decipher the symbols in a much more efficient way, that he did. It was within a week because mom sent me a picture of him reading a book, and she was in tears about this.
He was a 10-year-old little boy.
Yeah.
Could not read a first
He was
grade.
in special ed.
Could not even read a first grade level book, and he was 10.
Yeah, and you could see the emotional blockage that would occur because he's in fourth grade by that point, and all along his teachers are saying, "You're broken, you're broken, you're broken." So very miserable feeling to have. What was curious about this, because that the idea of fixing the reading skills or rewiring those reading skills is one component of brain activity. The other side, what the mother noticed through he was in recreational hockey leagues, that he moved up, and I'm not the big hockey guy here, but he moved up enough levels through the coaches within that first semester that he, is on the front line scoring goals, and the coach says his motor skills has improved dramatically. And that's exactly true with this idea of a left-right switch is one of the models of the way data gets crossed back and forth between the hemispheres. Is if you have trouble distinguishing left and right, and your hand-eye coordination is really important to shoot a goal, you get things backwards, then to be able to make that more efficient, it's not surprising that it improved the hand-eye coordination enough so that a coach who's trained to see these things in these kids goes, wow, that kid's just taken a huge leap in his physical abilities there. It was noticeable.
Must have been a growth spurt.
Must have been a growth spurt.
Tell me about the autistic woman.
Well, she was 30 years old. She was extremely frustrated and frustrating because she would go into rages constantly. And her dad had died, but her mother had refurbished the master bedroom closet to pad all the walls. And that was whenever she acted up, she was put in that room and until she quieted down, which was very frequently throughout the day. But the woman had been normal until age 8, maybe 7. But she was sent to live with her grandmother for the summer because the grandmother lived on a farm, and had a good time. And she came back and it was obvious something was wrong. Well, it turned out that she was abused by her uncle during this time. And that began to set off all types of issues until we came along, at age 30. When she was 30, we were called in to see what we could do to help that woman. What you do is you find out what triggers this. So one of the triggering things in her mind was just hearing somebody pee in the bathroom. That tinkling sound would trigger her.
I can see how that would do it.
Yeah.
Really?
And
Okay.
it was like that would start a huge issue.
Avalanche.
With avalanche,
Yeah.
frustration.
Really?
Go back into the room until your screaming stops, etc.
When you think of that, when the rage episodes would start, that's a sign that the brain has gone into fight or flight. So the question for us was, well, why would the sound of the toilet or people in the bathroom, why would that put her in the fight or flight?
What'd you come up with?
Go ahead.
Well, the abuse that the uncle was subjecting her to was sexual.
Yeah.
And it occurred in the bathroom primarily. This came all out with getting the mother. The more that we communicate with the mother, and this is part of the deal with clients, is, we're only getting 1/10 of the story. And when we start to put the puzzle pieces together, we see more. So in her case, the learning of sexual abuse in the family that occurred in the bathroom, and talking more and more to the mother, this was an ancestral pattern where her family there was incest of the brothers, and it was like a huge nest of things. But what we did was we made a vibropathic of the uncle's name.
Okay.
And then I built a brain circuit that had the sound of the toilet coupled with the uncle's name, what she called him. And I made that a vibropathic, which brings it back into homeostasis. And it was literally that day, the next day we did live broadcasts, it stopped.
So when you said did your live broadcast, you were doing it probably looking at Zoom, I think you said used.
Yeah.
But you could literally have them on video.
Mom had the camera
and
running.
See exactly when the broadcasting started, when you're sending the
Yes.
Vibropathic.
Vibropathic, yes.
I don't know why that worked, but when you're sending the vibropathic to her, you could literally see if there was a reaction going on almost immediately.
Yeah, yes. She was a type that, for example, had restless leg syndrome that would always be bouncing. And then when those broadcasts started, it was in a second. It wasn't there. It was like, and that happens with restless leg, is when someone becomes occupied with something else in their brain, when they're focused on something or sensing something or feeling something, then a lot of symptoms change, or a lot of indications change. In her case, it was, you could tell, and you could see her physically moving back as if she's getting ready to go on a ride of some kind. She wasn't very verbal, and just from that alone was us as well. It definitely got to the right place. This broadcast. And but no, the next day the email came from her mom saying no episodes, and it was literally that toilet flush that you're trying to have the girl in the other room where she couldn't hear it to prevent the start of the episode, which would last hours.
It's interesting, fascinating. Now you had another case about the Jewish woman that to me is a fascinating one, about what you're finding more with the ancestral type stuff that within the healing and all of that. And it's more about the lines of how you're having to do basically and broaden your perspective on your investigation. And because this is an aspect, I think, that we're seeing more and more as all of humanity is moving into a new earth level consciousness. We have to heal all of this old stuff, and I'm just can't help but believe that more of these souls that are coming in, they don't have as much individual karma, but they may be acting out something that seems like individual karma, but is ancestral that they're playing with. And tell us about
Yes.
the Jewish woman.
Well, we had this woman in class, and she had exhibited a lot of symptoms of paralysis that were like arsenic, in the sense of stooped shoulders, stiff muscles. Her voice box, when she talked about herself especially, was very, very soft. You could barely hear her. When she talked about her family, it was very much like that. But when she was not talking about herself, when she was talking in a teaching mode, she was pretty well normal. But she was trying hard to heal herself, and we tried many things that would help this. Our usual is to broadcast arsenic homeopathic, but that didn't do a thing. And we kept asking her what was going on in her life. Well, she was living in her great-grandfather's house with an extended family. She had her own little apartment, and her brother had an apartment, and there was a niece and nephew, wives, in this big house. And we'd ask her, did her family go through the Holocaust? No, they'd been there in America the whole time. There wasn't anything going on there. And finally, we realized that part of her inability to heal, as well as the softness in the voice, especially when talking about herself, was her Jewish ancestry. She was a non-practicing Jew. It didn't make any difference. I'm not a Jew. At first she denied that. But then she talked about her family and realized, yes, she had Jewish ancestry. It didn't apply to her. But finally, it dawned on us that she was suffering from the tribal energy of victimhood. And she felt like she was a victim of who she was and of her family. She didn't want to move out of the house because she enjoyed, the family dynamics. But it was a pressure that she was feeling that she was never herself. So what we did was broadcast the arsenic homeopathic at the 100 M level. And that is what I would call, from the time of Moses, level. It's a whole tribe that had to be healed, because the victimhood was carried on from generation to generation to generation.
And if I could, you had, within y'all's work, you had done the work ahead of time, tuning into the different potencies that you need for different levels and different energy bodies and all of this. And when it came down to getting the thought of going that far back, it needs a really high potency of 100 M
Right.
within the vibratory.
Yes, vibrational energy.
Yes.
So that's what we did. She was in our presence, and we watched her change as we broadcast that energy. You could see the shoulders straighten, her head go up. She started, moving around. Her voice started being strong. And it was a visible change that came over her.
Almost instantaneously.
Almost instantaneously.
Whereas your normal protocol, like for myself, the computer runs the program 3 times a day for 6 months, basically, or whatever
Yes.
you intuit for that
Yes.
length of time. Whereas in this instance, so it's not always instantaneous. We love it to be, but in this
Yes.
instance, it did show an immediate reaction that you could physically see with the eyes, which was really nice.
Yes.
How about the Chinese women that you've been working with?
Yes. Those are also very interesting.
You want to take this one there, Larry?
Well, we had the opportunity. We've had several opportunities now. We've encountered a group of like-minded people, primarily first and second generation Taiwanese Americans. And we were on a trip out to California in February, and we had the opportunity. We did readings on 85 Taiwanese in 4 days, which is a lot. And in that process, Gisela and I were noticing what we had noticed with a group we had done 2 months earlier, a different group of Taiwanese first and second generation Americans, that the women, even if they were what we would consider to be healthy, functioning individuals, like they had jobs.
On the surface.
Right. But they all came to the point of we started to see and understand, and we got to the heart of the matter more quickly as the cases went by, was they quite often had no self-respect or little self-respect and low self-esteem. And discussing this over time with them, the women all agreed that, in Chinese society, culturally speaking, the male is the most important child in the family. And so some of these women, or again, the majority of these women, when you start to nail it down and say, this is about how you feel about yourself, 9 times out of 10, they were the oldest sibling, and the younger was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And so these women would describe me as, once my brother was born, I was taken out of school. I was told I have to raise my brother. I have to feed him. I have to make sure he gets to school. I have to make sure that he does his homework because he is the most important person in that family. And you can imagine with that kind of a message in your childhood that a woman like this would grow up and feel worthless, absolutely worthless. And that's what we saw. So again, we looked at that on a cultural level through the ages to say, is this Asian culture? Is this Chinese culture? Is this what happens when you grow up in China? And in thousands of years, it's always been, the male has always been the honored person in those families, in the children. And what was also weird was in California when we encountered these families, it was very, very similar in one sense to what was going on with the second generation Taiwanese that are growing up in America, that are in their 15-year-olds. I saw some young teenagers, but mostly maybe say 10 to 30-year-olds is what we dealt with for that second generations, where the sons, from American viewpoint, were spoiled, rotten little kids that they got whatever they wanted, and they were waited on hand and foot by their siblings, and they could do no wrong. And it was very apparent, talking to parents about this, that they treated their daughter and their son completely different, and the parents were, well, of course we do.
That's the way it is.
That's the way it is. And we saw all of that. And so then the question for us was, if this is a stream of an ancestral pattern similar to what we recognize in the Jewish pattern of this tribal our collective consciousness, this collective baggage, what is going to be that key vibropathic that's going to trigger the opportunity for that 60-year-old woman, 50-year-old woman to be able to get out of bed and feel good about herself? Because what they all complained about more than anything else was energy levels. They complained about energy levels and lack of enthusiasm. And I talked to women who were very, very successful, you know, six-figure people, millionaires who had their own businesses, international businesses that felt worthless.
Really?
And they couldn't quite acknowledge that, wow, look what you built over these past 20 or 30 years, first as a business person, and then as a woman in that kind of a field, and then with that kind of a baggage tied around your neck.
So what did you wind up using for
Most of them responded very well to a shame vibropathic.
Okay.
In other words, we broadcast to them shame with a V at the end at 100 M.
Okay, very similar to
similar to the Jewish lady.
Cool.
And it's amazing what that did to them. In many cases, they would just start crying.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, but just within that same thought, what do you think would be the major pattern you would see for U.S. individuals, male, female? Certainly the African American culture would have its own issues around the slavery and being seen as within discrimination. The Native American we talked about, but the Native Americans had not had any of the drama and trauma up until we invaded their space basically over the last couple of 100 years. But you could go through any cultural scenario, and I would think you would have to do some research, but you could intuit and come up with a different energetic healing that could be broadcast that would help that, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely.
It would just take the work.
It takes for us to recognize patterns, and when you talk about Americans, I just look at it. America certainly is the melting pot of religions, of races, of cultures. And so it's a little bit harder to say this is all American. However, that being said, I think we touched on it briefly before, it was, to me, one of the biggest anomalies, or one of the biggest baggage that we have right now, is our society is geared towards instant gratification. And this lack of desire to be patient with processes. And we want it fixed now. And I've always reflected on that, saying, are we a product of our current society, or is this a tribal characteristic that's been building over the years?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that I just see a lack of patience overall in how we treat ourselves, how we judge ourselves, how we judge others, and how we allow ourselves to get caught up in drama.
I would offer exactly along those lines the judgment we have in the United States that, our way is best.
Wow.
As a world traveler, and I travel around the planet as a pilot for 40 years, I could see the different cultures and where something really was very loving and really working. And let's face it, Americans don't have the best reputation
We'll start there.
as a traveler
Mm-hmm.
and being accepting of other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
There is a very definite bias and judgment, point blank,
Sure.
that many Americans carry. And I see it in the elected officials. Bush had never traveled out of the country, Bush Jr., until he became president. And his policies, as an example, just one example, reflected that. He was not, one would say, cosmopolitan. He was a very narrow-minded, in essence, Texan or whatever, not to beat up on Junior, but there's all of that. But one way or another. Wonderful. Thank you for being with me today. And we could talk for another couple of hours,
Yes.
but my batteries will run out soon enough. And with that, we'll definitely have to do this again. But for someone to get in touch with you for a Peaceful Meadow retreat, or for the homeopathics, or for Access Hanna, how would you like them best to get in touch with you guys?
Well, if you look at peacefulmeadow.com, that's our website. You can sign up for a reading. You can sign up for classes. You can call us.
And the number
leave a
is?
Message 303-442-2490.
Wonderful. And once again, if you'd like, this is the book that you guys created, and it's a compilation of Hanna's teachings, Help One Another. And as you correctly said, this is, in essence, her Bible, with a lot of healing.
Yes.
Once again, thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for joining, and till we see you again.